The coffee cup hit the table so hard that it shattered, but the sound that followed was even more painful. Hot coffee splashed across the young waitress's face, neck, and white uniform. She stumbled backward, covering her skin with trembling hands as the entire luxury restaurant fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then the woman who had thrown the coffee stood there in her designer red dress, staring at the waitress as if she had just been inconvenienced by something beneath her attention. The waitress, Grace Bennett, was only 24 years old, but in that moment, she felt much older. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried desperately not to cry in front of the wealthy guests watching from every corner of the restaurant. She had learned a long time ago that poor people were expected to suffer quietly. But nobody in that restaurant knew that the man about to walk through those doors was the one person who would never allow Grace to suffer silently again. If you believe kindness can change someone's life, and that everyone deserves a second chance no matter where they come from, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the person who deserves to be seen the most. The story began on a rainy Thursday evening in Chicago, Illinois, inside one of the city's most expensive restaurants. The Crystal Harbor was the kind of place where business executives signed million-dollar contracts over dinner, celebrities celebrated private occasions, and wealthy families gathered beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. A single meal there could cost more than Grace earned in a week. Grace had been working there for nearly 8 months. She was not there because she dreamed of serving rich people. She was there because her younger brother, Caleb, needed her. Their parents had died several years earlier, leaving Grace to raise Caleb while trying to finish her own education. She had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, but dreams became luxuries when rent was due, groceries were expensive, and medical bills arrived faster than paychecks. Every morning, Grace woke before sunrise, prepared Caleb's breakfast, packed his school lunch, and took 2 buses across Chicago to her first job. After that shift, she traveled to the Crystal Harbor for her evening work. By the time she returned home, it was often after midnight. Still, Grace rarely complained. Her coworkers knew her as the girl who remembered everyone's birthday, carried extra umbrellas for customers when it rained, and sometimes bought dinner for elderly guests who looked embarrassed when they realized they had forgotten their wallets. She had very little, but somehow she always found something to give. That evening, Grace had been exhausted. She had barely slept the night before because Caleb had been sick with a fever. She had spent the morning worrying about him, but he had insisted she go to work because he knew they needed the money. Around 7:30, a beautiful woman named Victoria Caldwell arrived at the restaurant. She was 38, elegant, wealthy, and accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. She was married to Nathan Caldwell, the billionaire CEO of Caldwell Technologies, one of the most powerful technology companies in America. Victoria entered with 3 friends and immediately attracted attention. Her red dress was expensive, her jewelry glittered under the chandeliers, and her confidence made the entire restaurant seem smaller. Grace was assigned to her table. At first, everything seemed normal. Grace brought menus, poured water, and carefully explained the evening specials. Victoria barely acknowledged her. She was more interested in checking her phone and taking photographs of the table. Then Grace noticed something. A small boy was sitting at a nearby table with his grandmother. The boy looked tired and hungry. When his grandmother quietly told the waiter that they could only afford 1 meal to share, Grace secretly asked the kitchen to prepare an extra plate and paid for it herself. Victoria saw her. She watched Grace kneel beside the child and smile warmly before returning to work. For reasons Grace could not understand, that kindness seemed to irritate Victoria. When Grace returned to Victoria's table, Victoria complained that her coffee was not hot enough. Grace immediately apologized and replaced it. A few minutes later, Victoria complained about the spoon, then the water, then the lighting. Grace remained patient through every complaint. Finally, Victoria ordered another coffee. Grace brought it carefully, holding the cup with both hands. She was halfway around the table when someone bumped into her from behind. The coffee tilted. A few drops landed on the tablecloth. Grace froze. Victoria stood up instantly. What happened next was something Grace would remember for the rest of her life. Victoria grabbed the cup and threw the remaining hot coffee directly at Grace. The liquid struck Grace across the side of her face and neck. She cried out, and stumbled backward. The restaurant went completely silent. Grace pressed her hands against her skin, tears rolling down her cheeks as the pain burned through her. Victoria accused her of being careless and embarrassing the guests. Grace wanted to defend herself. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell everyone that the coffee had been knocked from behind. But she remembered Caleb waiting at home. She remembered the rent. She remembered how easily wealthy people could make one phone call and destroy a poor person's life. So she lowered her head and whispered an apology. That was when the front doors opened. A tall man in a dark blue suit walked into the restaurant. Nathan Caldwell had arrived. He had just returned from a business trip to New York and had not told Victoria he was coming. He had expected to surprise his wife with dinner. Instead, he saw his wife standing beside a trembling waitress. He saw the broken cup. He saw coffee dripping from Grace's hair. And he saw the tears she was desperately trying to hide. Nathan stopped walking. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he looked at Victoria. His expression changed completely. He had known his wife could be demanding. He knew she sometimes treated employees coldly. But he had never seen this. Victoria tried to explain that Grace had spilled the coffee and embarrassed her. Nathan looked at Grace. The young woman could barely meet his eyes. He asked if she was hurt. Grace shook her head at first, instinctively trying to protect her job. But then her knees weakened. Nathan caught her before she fell. The entire restaurant watched as the billionaire CEO helped the waitress sit down. He asked someone to bring cold water and called for medical assistance. Victoria stood frozen. For the first time that evening, she looked uncertain. Nathan then noticed something else. Grace's hands were shaking uncontrollably. He asked why she had been working when she was clearly exhausted. Grace hesitated before finally explaining that she had a sick younger brother at home and could not afford to miss work. Something inside Nathan changed. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his money, his influence, or his approval. He had forgotten what it felt like to meet someone who had nothing to gain from him. Grace was not asking for money. She was not asking for sympathy. She was only trying to survive. The restaurant manager hurried over, terrified that the incident might become a scandal. He tried to explain that Grace had made a mistake. Nathan stopped him. He calmly asked whether the restaurant had security cameras. The manager said yes. Within minutes, the footage was reviewed. It showed exactly what Grace had said. Someone had bumped into her from behind. She had not spilled the coffee intentionally. Victoria had thrown it. Nathan watched the footage twice. Then he looked at his wife. The room seemed colder. Victoria finally began crying and admitted that she had been angry for weeks. She explained that she felt invisible beside Nathan's success. She had become obsessed with appearances and terrified that people were judging her. But Nathan told her that pain did not give anyone permission to hurt another person. Those words silenced her. Nathan then turned toward Grace. He told her she was not fired. Instead, he offered to pay for her medical treatment and told the restaurant manager that Grace would receive paid leave until her burns healed. Grace immediately refused the money. She said she could not accept charity. Nathan smiled sadly and explained that it was not charity. It was responsibility. He had watched too many powerful people make mistakes and simply walk away because they could afford the consequences. He refused to become one of them. But the story did not end there. 3 days later, Nathan visited Grace's small apartment on the south side of Chicago. He expected something modest. He did not expect to see Grace sitting beside Caleb's bed, reading him a children's book while trying to hide her own exhaustion. Caleb was 12. When Nathan entered, the boy immediately became nervous. Grace introduced him as the man who had helped her at work. Caleb looked at Nathan and then at his sister. He asked whether the waitress who had been hurt was really his sister. Grace smiled and said yes. Caleb reached for her hand. He told her he was proud of her. Those simple words broke something inside Grace. She had spent years being strong for everyone else. That night, she finally allowed herself to cry. Nathan witnessed it quietly. He realized that wealth could buy almost anything except the courage it took to keep going when life gave you nothing. Over the following weeks, Nathan made several changes. He created a new employee protection policy throughout his company and restaurant investments. Every worker would have access to medical support after workplace incidents. Employees could report mistreatment without fear of losing their jobs. But he did something else for Grace. He offered her a scholarship to finish nursing school. At first, Grace refused. She believed opportunities like that were for people with better backgrounds. Nathan told her that talent did not belong only to wealthy families. Eventually, Grace accepted. Months passed. Her burns healed. Her confidence returned. And she returned to school. Meanwhile, Victoria began attending counseling. For the first time in her life, she was forced to confront the insecurity behind her cruelty. She apologized to Grace privately, not because Nathan demanded it, but because she finally understood what she had done. Grace did not forget the pain, but she forgave her, not because the pain had been small, because Grace refused to let someone else's cruelty decide what kind of person she would become. 2 years later, Grace graduated from nursing school. Nathan and Caleb were sitting in the front row. When Grace walked across the stage, Caleb was crying. Nathan stood and applauded louder than anyone. The girl who had once stood trembling in a luxury restaurant was now a registered nurse. She had not become successful because a billionaire rescued her. She became successful because someone finally opened a door, and she had the courage to walk through it. Years later, Grace opened a small community health clinic on the south side of Chicago. The clinic provided affordable care to families who could not afford expensive hospitals. Above the entrance was a simple sentence she had chosen herself. Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. Nathan remained one of the clinic's biggest supporters. And every year, on the anniversary of the night the coffee was thrown, Grace would return to the Crystal Harbor. Not because she wanted to remember the humiliation. She returned to remember how close she had been to giving up. She returned to remember that one terrible moment had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning. If this story touched your heart, please support the video by liking it, sharing it with someone who needs hope, and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about kindness, courage, forgiveness, and second chances. And before you leave, I have one special request. Comment, "Kindness always wins," below if you believe that someone else's cruelty should never stop you from becoming a good person. Because sometimes, life will pour pain over you when you least deserve it. Sometimes people will judge you because of your clothes, your job, your bank account, or the life you were born into. But Grace learned something that night that changed everything. Your circumstances do not determine your worth. Your pain does not have to become your personality. And your past does not have to control your future. The hot coffee burned Grace's skin, but it never destroyed her spirit. Instead, the woman everyone had overlooked became the person who would spend the rest of her life helping people who felt invisible. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the person standing quietly in the corner of the room is carrying a story powerful enough to change everyone around them. You just have to be kind enough to notice.